Beyond the Gates spoilers tease that the quiet bravado Dani shows to her friends is the thinnest of veils, a deliberate performance meant to convince everyone, and perhaps herself, that the fracture lines in her life are merely hairline cracks instead of deep, splintering faults. She asks for a bet with Joey as if it were a game. The wager itself is less about money or pride and more an act of defiance, a way to place an outward stake in a private fear. The underlying logic of the bet is dizzyingly simple and grotesquely intimate. Joey predicts that Dani's marriage to Andre will not survive, that history and gravitational pull will tug her back toward Bill. Dani takes the bet not because she believes in the promise she makes, but because making any promise at all is better than admitting the truth that she feels destabilized, hollowed out at moments, prone to old impulses she had sworn to kill. The wager becomes an instrument for both denial and rehearsal. She practices the woman she wants to be by speaking the words, and in doing so she creates a narrative that might, if she repeats it enough, become truth. Their conversation begins with the residue of another refusal. Ridge had called earlier, the ring of the phone a small, persistent alarm. He had offered something Dani didn't want, not a thing, exactly, but a possibility, an invitation whose contours she couldn't accept without acknowledging how much she still needed to grow. When she turns down Ridge, the refusal is a soft, private thunder, careful, reasonable words to mask how raw she feels. The refusal is not only to Ridge, it is a refusal of an easy path, of an external solution that would let her off the hook. She deliberately keeps Ridge at arm's length, telling herself that stability cannot be purchased through a call. Afterwards, when she speaks to Joey, she leans into theater. Her voice is steady, her laugh practiced. But the features show in the pauses in how she answers Joey's jabs about Bill with a sigh that lasts a second too long. Joey, oppositional and precise, does not mince. For him, Dani and Andre's marriage reads like a temporary alignment of convenience and nostalgia, two people orbiting the same old gravitational center. Paraphrased as "you'll go back to Bill." He frames the future as a kind of inevitability, not maliciously but with a cold pragmatism that always sits behind his bravado. Dani fires back with markers of control. "I'm fine," she says, as though the three words themselves will anchor her. But beneath that anchor is a loosened rope. She knows, with a private, almost panicked clarity, that she is not fine. The knowledge presses against the inside of her chest like an animal against the bars of a cage. The conversation pivots, as conversations between people who love the same handful of friends often do, to Vanessa. Dani and Joey exchange the sort of gossip that is also a kind of moral triage, measuring blame, assigning reasons, testing loyalties. Dani warns Joey, "Don't hurt Vanessa." She says this with the soft fury that comes from watching patterns repeat. "Your relationship with Vanessa is complicated," Dani says, and she means it both as a caution and as an understanding of the peculiar gravitational dynamics that stubbornly pull people back into one another's orbits. She jokes that Vanessa is playing with fire, which is a way of minimizing a fear so she can hold it in her palm without screaming. Joey, predictably, smirks and claims that Vanessa likes the heat. His flippancy masks calculation. He has learned that when someone admits to liking danger, you can build stability around it by being the danger they prefer. Dani, trying to be the voice of reason, cautions him not to count on Vanessa because the mess Joey brings with him is always larger than the solution he proposes. Yet Joey insists, and his insistence is a kind of prophecy backed by small, strategic moves. He has coaxed Donald back to school and mollified family tensions in ways that Dani did not expect. He has replaced Doug in his house, or rather, he has stepped into the spaces Doug left behind. That he is sleeping in Doug's bed, occupying a room that will always smell like absence, is not merely a practical choice. Joey's movements are chess-like. He recognizes that intimacy is partly about presence, about who shows up in moments that were previously vacant. In his view, being there, being visible, is a way to make the notional permanent. Vanessa's own calculations are messier because guilt distorts them. She allows Joey to sleep over, to share a bed in the house she keeps for herself and for memories. They agree to sleep in the other room, an arrangement both concrete and symbolic, a way to create a barrier between desire and history. Vanessa can't sleep in Doug's room, she claims, because to do so would be to step into a sanctified space of mourning. She says she still carries the weight of guilt, an acknowledgement that loops like another breath in her chest, and insists that they sleep in different rooms as a penance of sorts. If she knew that Joey had ordered Doug's death, the scale of guilt would become unbearable and would not merely crack but crumble her. The secret of that order is an explosive fulcrum. It sits, quiet and immense, under the surface of every laugh and gesture shared between Vanessa and Joey, threatening to topple both of them into chaos. Donald is the moral axis that both Vanessa and Joey manipulate with differing goals. Vanessa, using the rhetorical lever of loss, convinces Donald to return to school. She wraps the plea in the memory of Doug's death, coaxing empathy, bending grief into a tool for responsibility. She softens him with the narrative of a brother's promise, implying that Donald's education is a way to honor absence. That Donald is persuaded suggests that he remains malleable, that his sense of direction can be steered by appeals to loyalty and guilt. Yet his return to school is not merely an emotional victory. It is a strategic pivot for the household. His presence acts like daylight, revealing things that had been kept under covers. Donald comes back with a different posture, a suddenness that hints of urgency or of having been pushed back into the world against his instinct to remain withdrawn. His return is an inciting incident waiting to catalyze. While Donald is being pulled toward public life, the classroom, the library, the quiet routines, Vanessa is pulling inward, hosting Joey as if he were a guest in a house that is still partially haunted. The juxtaposition is painful, Donald, moving toward futures, and Vanessa, inhabiting pasts. Joey, a man with a talent for occupation, occupies both the physical space and the psychological space Doug left. It is in these spaces that small cruelties and big secrets accumulate until the air is thick enough to cut. Joey's ability to be present, to be useful in plain ways, coaxing Donald into school, offering practical help, makes him less suspect to outsiders. People measure threat by spectacle. Joey cultivates the opposite, quiet utility. That is how he gets away with things. His hands are visible in normal tasks while less visible hands do violence elsewhere. Samantha's scene is a study in generational friction and the way shame can ricochet across family structures. She brings Nathan home, a fact that should be mundane, ordinary, an evening of shared food and the polite exchange of small talk. Instead, the home becomes a theater where private impulses are exposed. Samantha and Nathan almost cross the line into sex. It's an episode charged with adolescent recklessness or with adult negligence, depending on the mood you are in and the way you look at their faces. The near act is interrupted in the most humiliating way possible. Smitty yells, and Martin stands there with a look that cuts through both of them. The father's shock is not merely parental. It is a moral judgment and a consequence of their own histories. The burst of outrage from Smitty and the stunned silence from Martin is complicated. It's partly fear for Samantha, partly anger over rules being broken, and partly the realization that upbringing rarely yields predictable outcomes. The argument that follows is not simply about sex. It is an argument about agency and control. Samantha is accused of losing herself, of making choices that signal a lack of discipline. Martin's lecture is less about the physical act and more about the narrative of a life, a sequence where education, restraint, focus are more valuable than reckless expressions of desire. He warns her to control herself, to prioritize studies, meaning, in his construction, that futures are made by calculated steps rather than impulsive acts. Yet there is hypocrisy in his admonishment that chills the room. The very world in which Samantha is being told to respect rules is the same world where adults around her have negotiated immorality, kept secrets, and negotiated their lives through power plays disguised as kindness. The moral high ground offered by Martin is a place of thin ice, and the crash into public scrutiny could break more than the embarrassed spirits in the room. This family tableau: Dani playing poker with attrition, Vanessa tiptoeing around catacombs of grief, Joey consolidating presence into power, Donald re-entering structures of convening life, Samantha stumbling into adult entanglements is stitched together by secrecy and performative truths. Every interaction is a negotiation between the outward face and the inward fissure. Secrets operate like subterranean rivers, carving canyons beneath the visible topography of daily life. They inform behavior without being spoken aloud. They explain why Dani insists she's fine, why Vanessa insists on sleeping in the other room, why Joey smiles with a hand in his pocket as if it were easy to buy people's consent with utility and company. From the outside, the household dynamic can look almost banal, people trying to rebuild, to find footholds. But it is impossible to ignore the moral calculus happening moment to moment. When someone chooses to place a hand on a child's back and say, "Finish school," that is not a neutral human kindness. It is a choice to prioritize one interpretation of legacy over another. When Dani bets with Joey, she is externalizing an inner wager, the question of whether she can hold to a future constructed with Andre or whether she will drift toward a past embodied by Bill. Her agency is constrained by the narratives available to her, and those narratives are not only psychology but habit, memory, and the gravitational pull of old lovers who know where the ropes are tied. Joey's presence is never accidental. He knows exactly which buttons to press: courage here, a softened night there, the pragmatic assistance that becomes necessary when grief makes small tasks monumental. That he ordered Doug to be killed, the revelation that trembles like a bad secret, reframes everything. His tenderness becomes a strategy, his charm an instrument. If Joey can be both the killer and the comforter, then the household is a theater where the roles of villain and savior are dangerously blurred. This blurring forces us to consider complicity. When a group of people benefits from the removal of someone else, whether by death or displacement, how do they reconcile the benefit with humanity? Vanessa lies next to a bed that remembers another man's breath and convinces herself she is atoning by sleeping elsewhere, but her atonement becomes performative if it is built on ignorance. If the knowledge of Joey's culpability were to seep into her consciousness, the atonement would disintegrate into something far uglier, an unbearable cognitive dissonance that cannot be repaired by different sheets. Donnell's return to school is a slow-acting agent of chaos and clarity. He brings with him both the risk of exposure and the possibility of redemption. Through his interactions with teachers and classmates, he might rebuild a sensible life. But every re-exposure to the community also increases the likelihood that someone will ask the wrong question. The more normal Donnell becomes, the more the abnormality of his family's private truths becomes conspicuous. By contrast, people notice incongruities: the way Vanessa looks at Joey, the way Dani avoids the subject of Bill, the way small silences fall like traps in conversation. Donnell's footsteps are measured and deliberate, and yet there is an impatience inside him that sometimes makes his returns abrupt. His reappearance at strange hours, his sudden anger at trivialities, these are symptoms of someone trying to reconcile the interior with the exterior without the aid of a map. Samantha's near misstep creates new fault lines in the family's moral architecture. Her brush with intimacy and the blow-up that follows ends up being not just about shame but also about the unspoken rules the parents have for themselves. When they scold her, they reveal the impossibility of their standards. They can demand discipline from a child, shout about priorities, but when the parents themselves have sat at tables where deals were made in darkness, the denunciation rings hollow. This hypocrisy will not be lost on Samantha. If anything, it will shape her future rebellion. She will remember the contrast between the parental lectern and the shadowed actions of the people who delivered it. Those memories will not be quiet. They will bloom into cynicism or determination to avoid the traps she sees. Interwoven with these human dramas is the odor of risk. Joey's moves are calculated. He understands narrative power. If someone like him can manipulate grief and presence to secure intimacy and control, then the house becomes a laboratory for power dynamics. He steps into Doug's routines, he smooths over small family needs, he calibrates his charm in public and keeps his hands busy in private. To observers, might he look like an honest man who cares? Yes, at a glance. But his actions are the chess moves of a player hiding a rook that is actually a dagger. Joey's satisfaction lies not merely in winning the bet he made with Dani's life, but in reshaping the board so that everyone else plays according to the new rules he defines. The tension is also psychological and ethical. Dani's insistence on being fine is a deliberate misdirection. She wants to see herself as a woman who can withstand temptation and anxiety because to admit the truth that she is uncertain and possibly slipping would make her an object of pity or intervention. Pride here is not vanity. It is a survival tactic. Being seen as stable buys her time and preserves privacy. Yet time is a double-edged sword. The longer she forces herself into the role of the composed wife, the more brittle the troll becomes. Eventually the tension will demand release, and when it does, it will come with a force that shatters carefully arranged life patterns. The house pulses with things unsaid. Every meal has an unspoken ledger of debts: who grieved for whom, who has been replaced, who has been consoled, and at what cost. The small kindnesses, making coffee, fixing a light bulb, calming a tantrum, are the currency in which Joey invests, and they buy him intimacy. For Vanessa, those small daily trades mean having someone to hold the practical load of grief, and for a while, this seems like a blessing. But beneath the blessing, there is rot, forms of grief commodified into service, memories edited to serve a new, comfortable present. As these threads wind tighter, the stakes escalate without ceremony. Donnell's sudden and abrupt return is the first knot to tighten visibly. The household is arranged on a kind of fault line: move a little and nothing happens, move a lot and the earth might shift. Donnell's reappearance is that move. It creates pressure that must be released. He comes home unexpectedly one evening, the door shutting behind him with a decisive thud that feels louder than it should. Vanessa, mid-conversation with Joey, who is perhaps laughing at something small and private, freezes. Her smile falters, and the air in the room seems to lose thickness, as if the oxygen had been measured out and then partially taken away. Joey straightens, not because he is suspicious but because he is ever aware of how presence and timing matter. Dani, maybe brought into the living room by a sudden worry about Andre, or maybe still on the phone with Ridge's unanswered call ringing in her memory, senses the shift in the room with a sharpness that leaves her stomach cold. Donnell's eyes sweep the room, and for a second they rest on the bed that is not Doug's anymore. They scan the curtains as if looking for evidence that grief has been rationalized away. Everyone holds their breath because they know that in the family of damaged things, the tiniest movement can become a revelation. The threat of exposure, of a truth colliding with a maintained lie, now sits between them like an animal on a leash. Tension-laden moment: someone's phone buzzes, or a clock chimes, or a dog barks, a trivial noise that becomes, in that charged atmosphere, the click of a hammer cocking. The scene freezes, balanced on a hairline of possibility, because what Donnell sees next and how he reacts will determine whether the house remains a fragile reconsolidation of grief or whether it cracks open into chaos. Donnell's eyes stay fixed on Joey for a moment too long, long enough for everyone in the room to feel the sharpness of his silence. He doesn't speak right away. He studies Joey's posture, the way the man stands slightly turned, half casual, half ready to defend himself. Vanessa breaks first. She starts to explain, voice trembling with the soft panic of someone caught between guilt and confusion. She says Joey stopped by to check on her, that he was just being kind, that nothing strange is happening. But her words come out too fast, and the speed betrays her. Donnell doesn't respond to her excuses, he only nods slowly, his face expressionless. The silence he leaves in his wake is heavier than accusation. He turns away, saying something vague about needing a shower, and walks down the hallway. The door to his room closes with a quiet but decisive click. Joey exhales, forces a smile, but his eyes follow the hallway until Donnell disappears completely. Vanessa sinks onto the couch, the weight of what almost happened pressing against her chest. Joey sits beside her but doesn't reach out. The air is dense with unspoken things: Joey's secret, Vanessa's guilt, Donnell's suspicion. For a long while, neither of them moves. Then Joey leans forward, elbows on knees, and says quietly, "He's going to start asking questions." Vanessa doesn't answer. She knows he's right. Donnell does start asking questions, but not out loud, at least. Not yet. He begins to notice things he had ignored before. A mug that isn't from the set Doug used. A jacket in the closet that doesn't belong to anyone he remembers. The faint scent of cologne that lingers in the hallway even after windows are opened. When he goes back to school the next morning, he is distracted. His classmates talk about assignments, upcoming exams. There's a heaviness in his chest that keeps him from focusing. He thinks about his brother, about the way grief has reshaped his home, and about the stranger who seems to be slipping quietly into spaces Doug once occupied. Meanwhile, Dani's world continues to tilt in its own quiet way. Andre notices her distraction. At dinner, she pushes food around her plate, nods at his stories, but her mind is elsewhere. The conversation with Joey still haunts her. The bet she made now feels like a curse she spoke into existence. She tells herself that Joey is wrong, that she won't go back to Bill, but her dreams betray her. In them, Bill's voice comes through like static from another life, soft and accusing. Ridge calls again that evening. Dani doesn't pick up. She lets the phone ring out, watching the name on the screen fade to black. When Andre finally asks what's wrong, Dani lies. She tells him she's just tired. He believes her at first, but doubt begins to build like humidity before a storm. He is not blind. He sees the tension in her shoulders, the way she checks her phone and then looks away. One night, he catches her staring at the wedding photo on the shelf, not with love, but with the kind of sadness that has no clear direction. He doesn't say anything. He just walks past her, quietly, and she hears the distance grow between them in the sound of his footsteps. Elsewhere, Joey's control begins to slip. His charm, usually so smooth, starts to fray around the edges. He knows Donnell's suspicion could unravel everything, and the anxiety makes him reckless. He tries to steady his grip on Vanessa, offering her comfort, promising her that everything is fine. But comfort becomes coercion in small ways. The way he insists on staying over, the way he reassures her a little too often. Vanessa senses the pressure, even if she can't articulate it. She starts to feel cornered in her own home. Her guilt about Doug intensifies. At night, she dreams of the accident, though she doesn't know the full truth. Some part of her subconscious seems to. She dreams of headlights, of water, of Joey's voice somewhere in the distance. One afternoon, Donnell comes home earlier than expected and finds Joey in the kitchen, talking on the phone. Joey's tone is sharp, impatient, not the friendly version of himself he shows the family. Donnell hears fragments. "No, we're done with that. It's already handled. Stop calling me." When Joey notices him standing in the doorway, he hangs up quickly, forcing a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. Donnell doesn't say anything, but something inside him hardens. Later that night, he searches through Joey's coat pockets when the man isn't around and finds a slip of paper with a name and a number scribbled on it, someone he doesn't recognize. It's small, but it's enough to feed his growing unease. Samantha, meanwhile, carries the embarrassment of her encounter like a mark she can't wash off. School feels like an interrogation. She imagines everyone knows. Martin tries to enforce stricter boundaries, curfews, study hours, curtailing phone privileges, but his control only pushes her further away. She spends more time outside, wandering aimlessly, messaging Nathan in secret. Nathan keeps his distance for a while, out of guilt, but soon enough they're talking again. Their conversations become the only space where she feels understood. When Martin finds out she's still seeing him, another argument erupts. This time, Samantha doesn't cry. She just stares at him with the cold clarity of someone who has stopped caring about being forgiven. The words she finally says cut deeper than she intends. "You're no better than anyone else here. You just hide it better." Martin doesn't respond right away. He wants to shout back, but the words catch in his throat because some part of him knows she's right. He's been so focused on preserving appearances that he's ignored how broken everything around him has become. Later that night, he sits alone in the dark living room, glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, listening to the distant sound of Samantha's door closing upstairs. As the days pass, tension coils tighter across every thread. Joey feels it most acutely. He starts having dreams about Doug, not memories, but warped visions. Doug standing at the edge of the bed, wet, expressionless, whispering something Joey can't hear. Each morning, Joey wakes drenched in sweat, his pulse hammering. He tells himself it's just guilt, but he's not the kind of man who believes in punishment by conscience. Still, he starts to look over his shoulder more often, checking mirrors, noticing shadows that don't seem to belong. The line between paranoia and reality begins to blur. Vanessa, unknowingly mirroring his descent, starts spending more time by the lake where Doug's body was found. She says she goes there to think, but what she really does is wait for forgiveness, for clarity, for something she can't name. She begins to feel Doug's presence too, but unlike Joey, she isn't afraid. The guilt has transformed into longing. She talks to the water, apologizing for things she can't articulate. One evening, as she's kneeling by the shore, she sees a reflection behind her, a shadow that looks almost human. She turns, heart pounding, but there's no one there. Donnell's investigation intensifies. He calls the number he found in Joey's coat but doesn't speak when someone answers. The voice on the other end says, "If this is about the job, it's done. Don't call again." Donnell hangs up, his stomach turning. The next day, he searches Joey's name online, finding nothing directly incriminating but enough to make the puzzle pieces align in dangerous ways. The realization comes slowly but firmly: Joey isn't just another bad influence, he's connected to Doug's death. Donnell decides to confront Vanessa, but before he can, Joey acts first. He senses Donnell's growing hostility and tries to neutralize it. One evening, he takes Donnell out for drinks under the guise of bonding. At the bar, Joey talks about loyalty, about family, about how people sometimes do terrible things for good reasons. Donnell listens quietly, his jaw tight. When Joey finally leans in and says, "Some people need to stay dead for the living to move on," Donnell pushes back his chair, his face pale. He doesn't say anything, just leaves. That night, Vanessa waits for Donnell to return, but he doesn't. Hours pass. She calls his phone. No answer. Panic takes hold. When she finally hears the door creak open near dawn, she rushes to the hallway, but it's Joey, not Donnell, standing there. His face is bruised, lips split, shirt torn. He claims he got into a fight outside the bar. Vanessa tries to believe him, but the dread in her stomach makes it impossible. She asks where Donnell is. Joey says he doesn't know. The next day, the police come by asking questions. Donnell's car was found near the old bridge, keys still in the ignition. Vanessa breaks down, insisting he wouldn't just disappear. Joey stands beside her, hand on her shoulder, the picture of support. Inside, though, he is calculating. He tells himself it wasn't his fault that Donnell brought it on himself, that some secrets need to stay buried. While Vanessa spirals into grief for yet another man she's lost, Dani's life unravels in parallel. Andre discovers text messages between her and Joey, fragments of their earlier conversation about the bet, casual but suggestive enough to seed suspicion. He confronts her, demanding to know what's going on. Dani denies any wrongdoing, but the argument that follows is vicious. Words meant to wound find their mark. Andre storms out, and Dani, shaking, realizes that Joey's prediction might be coming true after all. In the aftermath, Dani reaches out to Bill. She doesn't mean to, it just happens. The call starts with something innocent, a question about an old mutual friend, but the sound of his voice cracks something open inside her. By the time they hang up, she feels the same dizzy combination of guilt and relief that Vanessa feels when Joey touches her. Patterns repeating themselves, over and over, as if the entire town is caught in a loop of poor choices and half-buried sins. Joey, now cornered by his own lies, begins to sense that his luck is running thin. The police start connecting dots: Doug's death, Donnell's disappearance, old security footage showing Joey near places he shouldn't have been. Vanessa, finally unable to bear the weight of silence, begins piecing together what she's ignored. When she confronts Joey, the calm facade fractures completely. He laughs at first, but when she mentions Doug's name, the laughter curdles into something darker. He admits pieces of the truth enough to devastate her, not enough to incriminate himself. He tells her that Doug's death was necessary, that Donnell's disappearance was an accident. Vanessa slaps him, the sound sharp and final. Joey doesn't retaliate. He just looks at her, expression unreadable, and says, You think you know what guilt feels like? You haven't even started." Then he leaves. Later that night, Vanessa goes to the police. She tells them everything she knows, everything she suspects. The confession feels like bleeding out, painful, inevitable. Dani hears about the arrest the next morning. She sits by the window, staring out at a world that feels irreparably altered. Her phone buzzes with a message from Andre. "We need to talk." She doesn't reply. Instead, she watches the sunlight creep across the floor and wonders when, exactly, the line between survival and betrayal became so impossible to see.